Today we're going to be talking about why starting off with a big influencer is a bad idea. So what's everybody? Hooked you in with the anti-big influencer right off the bat. So Taylor, what are your percentage of hitting the bullseye?
Hitting the bullseye would be a 0% chance. The dartboard at large, 0. And maybe hitting the wall, 100.
Yeah. So what we're hinting at is the dartboard. Trying to hit the bullseye right off the bat and make it even worse. The odds making it even lower would be if you're drunk at the bar. So we parallel that with trying to go after a big influencer right off the bat. To back up it even a little bit, with any marketing strategy, whether it be SEO, email, etc., you need a holistic strategy. You need everybody pulling on the same end of the rope. But unfortunately in our space, in influencer marketing, a lot of people think that it's just, they can do one strategy or pull on one influencer, have them post, and expect to see a great return. And just like any other marketing area, it just doesn't work like that. And so similarly, we've come up with this strategy called micro to macro, where it really breaks down getting to that large influencer if that's a goal. And along the way, at the very least, you're learning what influencers are effective for you and your brand. So Taylor, what are 2 goals out of this strategy to come away with?
Yeah, I think the 2 goals of this strategy would be identifying, spreading the net wide as you possibly can, like you're saying and hitting at, swinging big right off the bat with one influencer, with one piece of content or whatever it may be, is just an injustice to what it is we're trying to do within this space. And if you make that applicable to all other marketing verticals, that's just not how you go about it.
Right.
So we would ask you to apply the same principles to the influencer space, so spreading the net wide and identifying the right influencers on behalf of your brand and what works for your brand, and then scaling, number 2, to bigger and better influencers once you have the data and the proof of concept.
Great. So these slides will pop up here and we'll basically just get into how this effectively works.
So as you'll see on your screen, it's the analogy that we've been speaking to, and you'll see the image of a dartboard. And what we place in the middle of this dartboard is an influencer, Tone It Up Girls. They are a macro. So say you are a brand that thinks the Tone It Up Girls is going to be your saving grace. They're going to just crush it for your brand. We place them in the middle of the dartboard. So prior to you going and making this massive risk of investment on this macro influencer, we are suggesting and proposing that you work yourself onto the outskirts of this dartboard, which consists of micro influencers. And these micro influencers are made up of personas that we believe made up the makeup of Tone It Up Girls, being fitness people, foodies, and mommies. So these 3 personas we've identified as the ones that make up Tone It Up Girls, and we're going to go after much smaller individuals at the micro level, people that have 10,000 to 100,000 followers, like Cody had mentioned, within these 3 personas.
Right, and just to piggyback off what Taylor was saying is, before making a long-term big investment for Tone It Up Girls, they have millions of followers. You want to test this out and scale to see if that would be a wise investment. If you don't have necessarily a macro person that you're thinking for on behalf of your brand, or you haven't worked with one previously, just picture your brand in the center of the dartboard and break up your customers into subcategories. So that'll be something that you'd want to be able to put in this exercise.
So like we had mentioned from the previous slide, the logic here is starting with micro first, spreading the net wide and testing to see if it's a viable investment to go after somebody of the macro level like Tone It Up Girls. So fitness people, foodie people, mommy people. We're going after 2 to 3 people in each of these spaces and doing partnerships with them prior to making that bigger investment.
And this is a real life scenario. So back in the day, we did work with Tone It Up Girls at Kalo when I worked at Kalo. And they approximately cost right around $100K out the door with photo shoots, everything involved. And then you're seeing difference in price point, which is between fitness foodies and mommies, and working with these micro influencers, on average it's about $1,000. So when you see the difference between a macro and micro influencers, it's pretty significant.
Definitely. If you look at the slide here, it's 1/10 of the cost. And if you really break down what you're getting in return from these different and separate packages, it's quite absurd and extreme. So as you'll see from a macro, and like I said, this is a real life scenario where they got 1 to 3 pieces of content max, and if you double that amount of content, you're looking at potentially doubling that price point with a collective reach of 1 million. But on that reach of 1 million followers, an average engagement is 1 to 1.5% for somebody at that level. So you're really not getting that many people involved with the content that you're able to receive that was posted on behalf of your brand. In comparison, on the other side of things, we're getting at least minimum 10 pieces of content from each of these influencers, 1 per person. But on average, we typically get 2 to 3 pieces of content actually in return from each of these people, giving us 20 to 30 assets on behalf of the brand.
Right.
And then the reach here on this side, the engagement is typically 3 to 5% with really dense audiences that people are really engaged with these niche micro-influencers. So greater engagement, collectively probably more people are actually seeing your content and engaging with it in different ways. You're coming to a greater understanding of which content from what persona and into what audience works best prior to scaling.
And with the reach there, you're going to be able to make that up on the back end. So you're initially not seeing the amount of reach socially as much, but on the back end with all this content to be able to repurpose, you're going to see much wider reach than just that influencer's profile. All right, so we're going to break down how this actually works and what this actually looks like. So in step 1, we're identifying the 10 influencers like Taylor mentioned in those 3 subcategories. So fitness, foodie, mommy, and we're going to find those people based on brand qualities, and then seeing their engagement rate, seeing all the raw data that they provide on our discovery platform, or maybe if you at home, if you don't have a discovery platform, you'll be able to, there's a ton of tools out there to see their engagement. You can even just go to their last 5 posts and do the math on as far as comments and likes. So you're gonna have your own perception of on brand, what does this person fit that on brand qualities? And step 2, basically, we're gonna have them post an IG story. We're gonna give them a tracking link on a UTM link on an IG story. This will give us data into their audience engagement. So we're gonna be able to see from their swipe ups, and this is a great testing and educational point, going back to the point of the strategy, is to see what audiences are actually attractive to you and your brand.
Right.
And then they're just gonna post, and then we're gonna track the results.
And I would say that is how you gauge which audiences are most, have the greatest affinity with your brand. But simultaneously, what I'd also do is collect this content, and if you are running paid media on Facebook, I would test all of it raw and edited within that as well, in that vertical, because then you really get to gauge and see which content and what type of content works on behalf of your brand, paired with what kind of individual. So I would test it in both ways there.
So next, as you see on screen, how we scale. So you see the X's there, and the point of that is basically we're gonna try to eliminate people that either didn't have the audience match, they weren't very interested in your product, or secondly, they just didn't create the type of content that you're looking for. So we're measuring this quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, we're gonna look at the raw data of the Google Analytics of the swipe ups. We're gonna see bounce rate, we're gonna see purchases, if you're lucky, and also just the swipe ups, the amount of swipe ups, the amount of people that saw the story. And then qualitatively, who was on brand and who spoke really well, who created selling content. And the point of this is just you keep going until you ultimately get to a larger tier influencer, if that's your main goal out of this.
Exactly right. And I would just look at this as well as how the content performed on the paid media side of things, collectively review all of that data before making the next decision as we slowly but surely get to that macro influencer. But along the way and along this ride, you're gonna get a bunch of data, a bunch of content, a lot more engagers, and you're really gonna be able to test and see which audience paired with what type of content, with which individual.
Exactly right.
Best.
And a lot of times what we come across is people don't really have necessarily the idea of that macro person that they're picturing for their brand, or they just necessarily haven't worked with those types of people because they don't have the budget or they don't have the connections. And so we totally understand if that's not something that you have as a goal. At the very least, using this strategy is you're eliminating people that don't work and educating yourself on people that do. And the people that work, what that means is, do they have the audience that is interested in your brand? And two, are they creating really captivating content so that you can keep going back to the well, if you will, and keep going back to them and saying, hey, this is a great relationship. It started one-off, but now we have some education that this is working quantitatively and qualitatively.
If someone at your brand is just absolutely fixated on using this specific macro influencer that's going to cost an absurd amount of money, I beg you to put this strategy in front of them and to start here. I think this is a great way to spread the net wide, like we've been saying, before making that big investment and swinging for the fences. We know you'll get there, and we're here to help you along the way. So we appreciate your time.
Have a great day. Drink responsibly.